Hey folks, Dr. Andy C here from Pro Prep. So back at you with another video, and today I'm going to talk about competition tactics. So when I say tactics, I mean strategies for getting yourself in shape for a competition, and pros and cons of these things, and maybe you can decide thereafter that the best way you're going to approach your contest preps thereafter in the future. So I just want to start with a couple of little anecdotes and some research. So in 2014, 2015, there was a series of case studies published in natural bodybuilding cohorts whereby they follow bodybuilders over the course of their contest prep, and what they measure is things like their muscle mass retention, body fat levels, heart rate, various different hormones over time while they get ready for these competitions. 2017, 2018, I ran one of these studies myself. We got 4 people in my lab, and then we measured a whole series of these things as well. We're working on trying to publish that just now. We sent it to a journal, unfortunately got rejected, so we're having to change some little bits and send it somewhere else, and hopefully that'll come out maybe this year, maybe next year. Well, we'll see how things go in that respect. Now, one of the things that we sort of find from these research studies is that there's something called the 1/4 rule. And the 1/4 rule says that for all the weight that you lose getting ready for competition or any sort of dieting that you do, a quarter of it is going to be muscle mass or fat-free mass, if you like. So it's unfortunate. And you can stem that tide. So if you have an appropriate diet, so enough protein in your diet, so around about 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, you probably have enough carbohydrates and calories as the next step. Not quite confirmed, but probably somewhere in the region of about 25 to 30 calories per kilogram of body weight. Then you'll be able to stave off some of that muscle wastage alongside resistance training. And you see that in obese populations, you can get that down closer to 0, but in really lean populations, so bodybuilders, for example, when you're starting your contest prep and your body fat percentage is around 12 to 15%, you see much higher rates of muscle mass loss. And it's much, much harder to keep the muscle. Now, a few of these studies that came out a few years ago, say Robson, for example, or Rosso, what they sort of found was that guys getting ready for the contest, they were seeing up to 43% of the weight they lost was muscle mass. So complete disaster. Not the way to diet for the show. And if you want to go and read that paper, Pablo Gentile did a really nice critique of it. But the Rosso study found that around about 19 to 20% of what you lose when you get ready for a competition is as muscle mass. Subsequently, the study that we did, and we followed it up, we've had 4 people, we found 2 of them lost around about that in terms of the muscle mass, that quarter again. Other 2 actually managed to avoid complete muscle loss altogether. So whether or not our tools that we're using were sensitive enough to detect the small changes, I think that was probably actually the case, but certainly you can get it down closer to 0. So that's the first thing here. So getting ready for competition inevitably almost sometimes leads to muscle loss, or at the very least you can do is keep what you had when you started. You're not building muscle, certainly not naturally, when you get ready for any sort of competition. Other anecdotes here. So when we see people getting ready for a competition, usually what happens is they do a show early in the spring, and if they're lucky, they then might qualify for a championships later on in the year, which normally falls around the August time. So they've been dieting for their competition, they get in shape for competition. Thereafter that, they then have this 3-month period, perhaps another 12 weeks, whereby they've got to then do that other competition. And what we see, and I've seen this for years from a judge's perspective, is you get guys at qualifiers and they look fantastic, brilliant, great competitors. By the time it comes to the competition though, a few months later, for the British finals, you think this guy's a contender or this woman's a contender. They're not. Something's happened in that time. And a few things happen. Either people get worse, so by the time they get to competition, they've lost size, they're smaller, or they come back again and they're not as sharp, they're not as lean. So they're a little bit, they're fatter, essentially, from here. They miss the mark from here. So there's 2 kind of strategies that people are going to follow at that point. They're either they do that early season competition, and then they continue to diet, and they prolong that dieting process, and they just get smaller. They might be just as sharp, but they're smaller. And bodybuilding's got 3 components: muscle size, symmetry, conditioning. And if you only fulfill one of those boxes, don't expect to win. The other thing that can happen is they've done their dieting, they've done the show, and then thereafter that, what they've done is, okay, they thought, I need to regain a little bit of weight, but they've gained too much, and then they can't get back in shape again for that competition. The other thing that people often do is they don't quite peak at that competition, the first one, and they end up better because they're peaking for the second one down the line. So if people come to me and they say, okay, well, what's the best strategy to do for this? I would always say do the shows closer together, because you're not having to diet as long, you're not having to put up with the negative consequences that come associated with those sort of dieting periods. Now, one thing that we see with the sort of studies that we're doing on bodybuilding populations is something like this. So I've got a little diagram. I made one of these the other day there. Hopefully it's not backwards. But on this axis here, we've got body weight, muscle mass, body fat. That's the red. And on this axis here, we've got the hormones, okay? I've got 2 main hormones in here that I've included, testosterone and cortisol. There are lots of other ones. There's leptin, ghrelin, thyroid hormone. These are things that people typically study. So what you see over time is people will get ready for competitions, and in this solid line here, that's body weight. And they manage to get their body weight down for this first show. And that's great. So they've lost the body weight. This dashed line, this is body fat. So you can see they've managed to get the body weight down for this first show as well. And again, that's fantastic as well, because they've got the body fat off and they've got the body weight off. This other line here, the dotted one, this is what we see in terms of muscle mass. And you can see here, they've managed to keep the muscle that they have built over the course, sustained it. But if they continue to prolong the dieting process, you're in real danger of losing the muscle mass down here. And then if this is your first show and this is your second show here, you can see that what you've produced in terms of muscle mass up here compared to muscle mass down here, you've lost size, yeah? Why do you lose size? That's obviously the next question. Well, you've got 2 lines again on here. We've got this one here. This is testosterone. And again, you can maintain testosterone. This is just a bit of rule of thumb, by the way, guys. This is not exactly how it goes. It usually probably goes a little bit more like that earlier. But you've got testosterone over a period of time. And then once you get to that first show and you're trying to maintain these really low body fat levels, you do see a dip in these hormones. And if we've got less testosterone, what you're going to see is less muscle mass. Equally, we've got cortisol. And cortisol is not just physiological in its nature in terms of stress, it's psychological as well. So people talk about diet fatigue and the stress of just being on a diet mentally. So you're not only getting this associated just with the low body fat levels, you're getting this with the diet fatigue at the same time. And this is what you see as we prolong the dieting process, the amount of cortisol that we're holding goes up. Now, these things are not to scale, right? They're on different scales at all, but this is a general sort of rule of thumb of what we see. Now, what people will try and do in terms of trying to make sure that you don't see those hormonal imbalances, this will include things like refeed days to try and kickstart the metabolism through the process. You'll diet on higher calories throughout the process as well. But what we typically seen in the lab was, it didn't really matter how you diet. If you've got a higher fat diet, if you put more carbohydrates in and you want to eat up along the sort of way, once you are down at those really low body fat levels, you're hanging on there really. Your body really is just sort of hanging on. You're not in a healthy metabolic state, you're not in a healthy physiological state, and really that's when you really run the risk of losing the muscle mass. And if we go full circle on here, it comes back to tactics. It's a case of, well, how do you want to approach the competition? Do you want to be in shape on the date of the contest and just nail it? Just get the body fat levels right, get the muscle retention absolutely right, and get yourself in a healthy hormonal situation. Just nail it. Just get on there. Doing that, you run the risk of maybe not being ready. Just maybe not being ready in that time. Maybe you need to be ready a week or 2 before, just for practical sakes, to make sure that you're going to be on the money, so you're not chasing your tail and having to do things to be right then. Or do you get yourself ready even earlier in that, and then you've got to sustain that low body fat level for a period of time, and then do the show thereafter that. And there are real dangers of that, as I've sort of just explained here. When you're trying to maintain those low body fat levels, you are really at risk of losing that muscle mass. Now, again, another anecdote here I'm going to give you. Last year, I competed in 5 shows. I did one in early summer in June, and then the shows after that were in the autumn, coming into the winter. So we'll forget about the one in June, because that was really just a get on stage as a touch up. The first show that I peaked did really in September. I wasn't ready for that show. I was probably about 95, 96%. But there's competitors that I competed against that were 100% ready for that show. That wasn't the big show for me. The big show for me was the one at the end of the year, which was the World Championships. I mean, when do you want to peak? Do you want to peak at Grand Prix or the Worlds? For me, it was obvious. So I actually got better and better going up to the show. I wasn't quite ready. I didn't get myself absolutely to the bone and then try and maintain that for a period of time. I got myself almost there. And then with that World Championships, I did another show after that. It's a bit better again. And then I did another show after that, and I was a bit better again. And then finally, when it came to the Worlds, I absolutely peaked and I was on it. That took me around about 5 weeks between that process. So I was still had about 5% to go. So each week, I eked out another 1%. I competed against guys at the Grand Prix. And yeah, I got bested in the Grand Prix. But by the time I came to the Worlds, I went like this in terms of my performance. And guys I was going up against, they went like this. So I peaked at the sort of right time from there. So it's a thing I've seen lots of times. I've seen pros do it. I've seen amateurs do it. They look better a few weeks before the show, or they look better at the smaller show. And when it comes to the big one, they've passed their peak thereafter that. And it all comes down to this, guys. It comes down to when you're at those low body fat levels, it doesn't matter if you're eating up into the show. Your hormone levels are going to be literally in the basement, or you're in high stress situations, and these glucocorticoids, these will be catabolic, and they do cause you to lose a little bit of tissue. And it comes back to that sort of literature stuff that I was saying right at the start. You've got the 1/4 rule. The studies that we done, we sort of show that actually, at the very least, you can maybe hope to hold on to that. In terms of sensitivity, I don't think our measurements were quite sensitive enough, because I think our guys were actually still getting smaller at that point there. Okay, I'm going to bring on to one last thing here before we go. Other tactics and strategies. You've got to think, if I've got a show in a year's time, what's the best way I want to do to approach this? And remember, any time we spend dieting is time that we're not spending building tissue as well. And I just want to say, okay, about mini cuts. If you're experienced as a competitor and you've dieted lots and you know how to get yourself in shape, unless you're doing it just for a personal goal, for a holiday or something like that, do you think it makes sense to take 8 weeks off this building process and then losing another, say, 6 weeks thereafter to get yourself back to a perfect anabolic situation, than compared to just spending, say, 14 weeks just building? That's up to you to sort of decide from that. Now, there's context with everything. There's context with all these things. You have to make the decision on the information you've got in front of you, the shows you're picking, the best strategies thereafter. And there's right ways, or rather, there's no necessarily right way to do this. And the circumstances might result in you just taking one of these approaches, but you just have to be aware of the fact that you're maybe, if you're down there at those low body fat levels, not going to be necessarily as muscular as you could be. And remember, it's really, really important to remember this, the best package wins. The best package, and it's bodybuilding. So it's who's got the most muscle, who's the most symmetrical, and then usually the person who's the most conditioned along with that. But unless you're muscular and symmetrical, it doesn't really matter about conditioning. Because I've seen guys on stage who are peeled, but they're small, they're not symmetrical, and they get beat. So just bear that sort of stuff in mind. Okay, folks, if you like this video, leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think of it, and be sure to check out the rest of my videos on Instagram, also the Pro Prep YouTube channel as well. Okay, thanks for your attention, guys. Cheers.